Welcome. This presentation is about turning strategic risk analysis into practical supply chain decisions. The title is From PESTEL to Stockpile because the core idea is that external risk should not remain as a paragraph in a strategy paper. It should influence how we assess suppliers, how we judge fragility, and how we decide the right level of safety stock, strategic reserve, or war reserve. PESTEL is often used as a broad scanning tool. It helps us think about political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal forces. But for supply chains, the real value comes when we apply those lenses to specific suppliers, source regions, and critical items. The question we are asking is simple. If conditions deteriorate, can the supplier still deliver? If the answer is uncertain, then a conventional safety stock calculation may not be enough. We need to think about absence of supply, not just variability of supply. For many years, inventory decisions have been built around variability. We look at demand variation, lead time variation, service level, forecast error, and replenishment performance. Those are important factors, and they still matter. But the modern supply chain risk environment is wider than that. We're dealing with sanctions, export controls, conflict, cyber disruption, climate events, industrial fragility, financial collapse, and concentrated single source supply. In those circumstances, the supplier may not simply be late. The supplier may be unable to supply at all. That changes the problem. Delayed supply is a planning issue. Denied supply is a resilience issue. Safety stock helps manage variability, but it does not automatically protect an organization from prolonged absence of supply. For critical items, we need a stronger link between supplier fragility and the stock posture we choose. The practical step is to bring PESTEL down from the strategic level to the supplier level. Rather than asking whether a market, sector, or country is generally risky, we ask what each PESTEL factor means for a specific supplier, site, sub-tier, or source region. Political factors might tell us whether access could be affected by sovereignty, conflict, sanctions, or export controls. Economic factors may reveal financial weakness, inflation exposure, or dependence on unstable input costs. Social factors might point to scarce labour, workforce disruption, or skill shortages. Technological factors could expose cyber weakness, obsolete processes, unique tooling, or dependence on a single system. Environmental factors show climate, energy, or transport choke point exposure. Legal factors highlight licensing, compliance, intellectual property, or regulatory constraints. The value is not in producing a long risk register. The value is in understanding whether this supplier can still perform when the environment becomes difficult. This slide turns the 6 PESTEL lenses into practical questions. The political question is, could access be removed by sanctions, export controls, conflict, or national priority? If so, we may need to stock for loss of access. The economic question is, could the supplier or a critical sub-tier fail without much warning? If so, we may need to stock for sudden collapse. The social question is whether labour, skills, clearances, or specialist knowledge could slow recovery. If the answer is yes, the recovery period may be longer than a normal lead time. The technological question is whether production depends on unique tooling, old processes, cyber resilience, or specialist intellectual property. The environmental question is whether climate, energy, or transport constraints could affect multiple suppliers at once. The legal question is whether approvals, licenses, or contract mechanisms could slow a surge response. The point is that each type of fragility changes the stock answer. It tells us whether we are buffering variation, disruption, absence, or reconstitution time. Once the supplier has been assessed through the PESTEL lenses, we need a simple way to compare fragility. That is where a supplier fragility index is useful. It does not need to pretend to be mathematically perfect. It needs to be transparent, repeatable, and good enough to improve decisions. A practical approach is to score each PESTEL dimension, for example from 1 to 5. A low score could mean limited exposure. A high score could mean severe exposure. Organizations can then weight the factors that matter most. In defense, political access, technological uniqueness, legal constraints, and reconstitution time may deserve heavier weighting than in a purely commercial environment. The index should also consider item criticality and substitutability. A fragile supplier becomes much more important when the item is mission critical and there is no realistic substitute. The output is not a perfect prediction of failure. It is a structured way of deciding where deeper stock, contingency planning, or redesign should be considered. A fragility score is only useful if it influences stock policy. Low fragility suppliers may be suitable for leaner inventory settings and routine safety stock. Medium fragility suppliers may require elevated buffers, dual source monitoring, more frequent review, and contingency triggers. High fragility suppliers are different. If the item is critical, hard to substitute, and supplied through a fragile source, then a standard safety stock calculation may be inadequate. That is where strategic safety stock, war reserve assumptions, or sovereign stockpile decisions may become appropriate. For extreme fragility, the answer may not only be stock. It may include supplier development, industrial mobilization, technology refresh, redesign, substitution, or sovereign capability. The key point is that risk posture should drive stock posture. We should not apply the same inventory model to every item when the supply realities are very different. This is the most important distinction in the presentation. Safety stock and war reserve are not the same thing. They solve different problems. Safety stock manages routine variability. It helps cover demand fluctuation, forecast error, lead time variation, and everyday uncertainty. It assumes the supply chain is still functioning. The supplier may be late, but supply still exists. War reserve manages absence. It is designed for situations where replenishment may not be reliable, timely, or possible. That could be because of conflict, sanctions, industrial shutdown, export denial, cyber failure, or sustained operational tempo. It also needs to consider reconstitution time, how long it would take to restart, scale, or replace supply. If we confuse these two tools, we either underprotect critical capability or overstock items that do not require deep reserve. The decision has to be clear. Are we managing variability or are we managing absence? There are two useful rules to take from this approach. First, if access cannot be assured, assume absence. That means we should not rely on optimistic assumptions where political, legal, geographic, or industrial fragility could prevent supply from reaching us when needed. Second, if reconstitution is slow, stock deeply. If the supply base cannot recover quickly, if tooling is unique, if skills are scarce, if export permissions take time, or if production lead times are very long, then standard buffers may not be enough. These rules are not a call to stockpile everything. They are a call to be selective and evidence-based. Deep stock should be reserved for the critical few items where absence of supply would create unacceptable operational, commercial, or national risk. To make this work, supplier fragility cannot be treated as a one-off exercise. It needs to become part of governance. The cycle is straightforward. Assess the supplier, score fragility, decide the stock posture, fund the policy, and review the assumptions regularly. The assessment should be owned, challenged, and refreshed. Supplier fragility changes. A supplier that was robust last year may become exposed because of regulation, financial pressure, cyber incidents, conflict, climate events, or changes in sub-tier dependency. The decision should also be defensible. If an organization is going to fund deeper stock or strategic reserve, it needs to be able to explain why. The evidence has to be strong enough for senior leaders, boards, finance teams, auditors, and, in defense, potentially ministerial or treasury level decisions. The closing message is that inventory is not merely a planning variable. In critical supply chains, inventory is a resilience decision. It is part of how an organization protects capability, service, operational readiness, and continuity of output. PESTEL helps us understand the external environment. Supplier fragility analysis helps us apply that understanding to real suppliers and critical items. Inventory policy then becomes more intelligent because it is linked to the actual risk of supply variability, supply absence, and recovery time. The objective is not to abandon efficiency. It is to apply efficiency intelligently. Some supply chains can remain lean. Some require elevated safety stock. Some require war reserve or sovereign stockpile. The challenge is knowing which is which. So the final takeaway is this. By linking PESTEL to supplier fragility and supplier fragility to inventory posture, we move from reactive buffering to deliberate, defensible resilience.